I'll introduce myself. So my name's Chris Mackay. I am working with the Mayoral Combined Authority, leading the public consultation on the final draft of the South Yorkshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy. Laurie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so hi, Nick, and hi, anyone watching this back. So my name's Laurie Cuban, and I project manage the local nature recovery strategy for the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority.
Great. So our format is we've got some slides that we're going to present, and then we'll have some time at the end to do Q&A and any discussion. The dog's got bored already. So that's good. He's disappeared. I'm going to hit share screen, and then Laurie's going to take us through some slides. So bear with me. We tested this just before, so fingers crossed it works. Is that presenting, Laurie?
Looks good. Yeah, great.
Great.
My door's shut, so my dog will unlikely be able to get in, but I'll be very impressed if she does. But yeah, good stuff. Well, I mean, thanks for coming. And so I've got a handful of slides just to kind of set the scene and to explain a bit of background about the nature recovery strategy. And really, this is kind of scene setting. This is just to kind of tee things up a bit. And I'm really happy to go over anything. But I think I'll just kind of run through this and see where we're up to, and see where we want to move into the workshop session. So I can see someone else just joined, so good timing. You haven't missed much. Just a couple of introductions. So if I just start with a bit of the kind of, well, where's this come from? So it's it's really national policy direction. The local nature recovery strategy has come out of the Environment Act 2021. That's the same act of Parliament which brought into being biodiversity net gain, which may be familiar, and it's biodiversity net gain is already being kind of carried out within the planning system. So that's come into force already. Nature recovery strategies are very much seen as complementing that, and planning planning authorities to be referring to the strategies where they're published and when they're published. So I think this is responding to a kind of scientific backdrop of nature decline. This is a long-term problem. South Yorkshire is not unique. England is not unique. The UK is not unique. This is a long-term problem. It's a global issue, but the UK unfortunately does have a bit of a dubious honour of often being described as one of the most nature depleted countries. And a couple of quotes there about being too small and too isolated. So you've probably seen some quite sobering statistics as well. I'm sure just about any kind of time series graph of kind of species abundance generally, and some specific species trends downwards, and particularly when records seem to kick in the 1970s. Certainly since then, species abundance and species at risk kind of trends downwards. So we want to turn that around, and this is a kind of national policy agenda to support doing that. And I think just in terms of how do we do it, throughout this process, it's been one thing that's often kind of come back to, and I think this is kind of shared among other responsible authorities delivering these strategies, is the mantra of the Lawton Review in 2010, which has obviously stood the test of time, and this kind of shorthand of more, bigger, better, and more joined up. So the diagram on the right hand side is it articulates this. So we're saying we need more protected sites. We need to create more space for nature overall. But the spaces we already have for nature, which are in kind of good ecological condition and doing well, we need to make them bigger. So we need to kind of buffer those and work from these core areas and enlarge them. But those existing sites, they might be protected. It doesn't mean that they are performing well for biodiversity. So there's a lot of kind of improvement in management that we can do. So it's making these places better and investing in them. And then finally, it's joining them up. So, making sure these are not isolated sites of abundant nature. They're connected, species are able to move between them, and that kind of creates a network, a nature network. So that's a sort of really whistle-stop tour of the sort of I guess the theory or some of the concepts behind the strategy that we've embedded into it. So if we go to the next slide, this may look familiar. This is an outline of South Yorkshire as a whole, and this is obviously the geography that we're working with, being the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. So we've got Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham, and Sheffield, and this is a kind of a baseline, if you like. This is a mapped output of broad habitat categories across the region. So it's it's, of course, it misses out some nuance, but it gives it's a very high resolution map, and it gives every kind of square grid a specific habitat type. You might just about be able to see in the writing at the top there. But basically, this, I think it's a useful reference, and certainly this kind of comes up in the strategy quite a lot in terms of just how diverse the region is. So I think we range in topography, we range from about 400 meters above sea level to the very west in the Pennines, all the way down to about 2 meters above sea level in some of the Doncaster lowlands. And in the west, we've got the Pennine Hills. We've got lots of blanket bog, lots of moorland, certainly a huge amount of peat, which is storing a lot of carbon. And I say that because one thing within our thinking is, to what extent carbon sequestration and other environmental benefits will come into the logic and the rationale for nature recovery. These wider environmental benefits, things like carbon sequestration and storage, flood risk management, physical and mental well-being and health. So just to sort of park that there. You've got ancient woodlands, certainly lots of that in Sheffield and Rotherham. We have the River Don system kind of flowing through our whole county. That's the sort of main arterial river, and certainly you can see, historically settlements have very much been shaped around that, and of course we've got a hugely rich industrial history around the river systems. Sort of moving towards heading sort of northeast, heading towards the lowlands, much more arable farming, kind of higher, more favourable farmland, essentially, moving away from the marginal farmland in the west, heading towards internationally significant lowland bogs, which are national nature reserves. So there's a real diversity within South Yorkshire in terms of habitats and landscape, and we've hoped to capture that in our priorities within the nature recovery strategy. So again, just a kind of whistle-stop tour of the region as a whole. Happy to come back to that if useful. Okay, so moving a bit more into the policy stuff, the nature recovery strategy, what is it? So I said already, it's come through the Environment Act 2021. The responsible body for delivering that, so we have the statutory duty to develop the strategy, is the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority. So our mayor is Oliver Coppard, and we're working really closely with so-called supporting authorities. So it's all the 4 local authorities. It's the Peak District Park, Environment Agency, Natural England, and we're also working really closely with the wildlife trusts and other DEFRA families, so the Forestry Commission, and I've said Environment Agency already, and Natural England. We're also working with the Don Catchment River Trust. So those organisations are kind of at the heart of our governance model, if you like, and they've been really close to the detail as we've developed the strategy. On this slide, you can see a couple of quotes from DEFRA, just to give a sense of what the strategy is intended to be. And you can see at the bottom there, there's 3 ticks of what the output should contain. So I think at the heart of it, this is about, with those organisations, with wider partners, and of course with the general public, it's about agreeing priorities for nature recovery. So coming to some some consensus about what needs to happen in our region and why. It's where possible to map those propositions. So where possible, we have mapped those. In fact, it's only been about 1 in 3 of all of our priorities, all of our measures even, that we've managed to map. But certainly where we could, we have, and that's another product that is part of our public consultation and will be used in certain contexts like biodiversity net gain. And you can see a quote there from our mayor as well, linking to his manifesto. Okay, so I'll go to the next slide. I think I'll skip that slide. It's slightly process heavy, but just saying kind of, we've developed an evidence base as a first step. We've gone through many rounds of workshopping and working with our partners, the organizations at the heart of that, you can see on screen. And as a final step, as I said, we've attempted to map where possible the sort of the places with the greatest potential for nature recovery in the region. And if I go to the next slide. So yeah, just a bit more on the wider engagement we've done. So this is actually pre the public consultation process that we're now in. So lots of workshops with a range of organisations, engagement with farmers, in particular Bradfield farmers and Dearne Valley farmers as well. I know, Chris, you've had more recent engagement with wider partners in Doncaster, so I think you're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But just to say, just to give a sense of the wider organisations that have fed into this over time. And if you head to our public consultation website, some of this should look familiar. So you've got the kind of summary document of the strategy, the front cover of which is on the left there. I mentioned the mapping. So you've got a kind of in the middle there, you can see a screenshot of some of our maps. So this is suggesting potential for different types of habitat interventions in different places. And again, on the right-hand side, that's a kind of screenshot of our public consultation website. So if you've not managed to go to the website, and if you've not managed yet to fill in a survey, I'd really encourage you to do that. And we're in the last week of our 6-week public consultation window. So surveys will close on Friday. So please do respond to those surveys if you can. And I'm sure we'll come back to this, but this is just a sense of, what next really. So we've got a strategy that we've taken to public consultation. We will be revising that and we will be publishing that hopefully by the end of this calendar year. But following that, we know we will have a role ongoing, supported by DEFRA, for delivering or implementing the strategy. And on the right-hand side of the screen, in green writing, those are the kinds of things that DEFRA is looking for us to continue to work on. So it's everything from trying to embed the strategic aims within all public authorities in the region, to developing pipeline of projects and looking to kind of prioritize which projects to kind of work on and help to deliver, is to continue this delivery partnership and this governance model, I guess, in some form, to kind of bring partners together to see how we can work best to deliver on the aims of the strategy. And then there's a final piece on sort of monitoring and reporting. And I won't go into detail on what's on the left, but I think if you just look to the bottom left-hand side of the screen, certainly in the farming context, environmental land management schemes, I think is one of the most kind of has the greatest potential to see what that, how we can use ELMS to deliver nature recovery strategy. And the full detail is not yet available from DEFRA in terms of how they will link agri-environment schemes to nature recovery strategy, but certainly that's a really kind of fertile policy space, if you like, in the farming context. Yeah, so happy to skip to the next slide. This is just kind of saying about those functions that DEFRA want us to that DEFRA will continue to kind of support within our organisation. And if you go to the next slide. So yeah, just to wrap that up, really, is that where we're currently up to is we're in the back end of the public consultation. As I mentioned, it will close on Friday. We'll be spending the next part of autumn, or sort of end of summer, early autumn, revising that, understanding what we've heard from the public consultation responses, revising our strategy in line with that, and then going through a formal approval processes towards the back end of the year. And then from next year, that's when work to delivery really kind of kicks off formally. So I think that's my last slide, and I'll leave it there, but really happy to take any questions at this point, and I'll hand back to Chris.
So if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask now, do feel free to come off mute and ask Laurie. If not, I'm going to keep going and share a bit of what we've heard from farmers so far in the consultation, and that's both through the development and during this latter phase. Right, that means you gave a very clear presentation, Laurie, no questions. So in terms of what we've had a lot of really rich feedback from farmers and land managers throughout the process. So it was built over a couple of years with lots of input into what should go into a really strong strategy for South Yorkshire. And I think a lot of what we've heard through the consultation is that the work that was done to develop it is very much valued. So during development, farming and land managing communities told us that nature has to work alongside food production. It has to combine with long-term financial viability, and also that kind of short-term schemes don't really work for farming communities. So there was a request that action should be practical, locally appropriate, that existing good practice should be recognised, that habitat creation must include long-term management, and that long-term management should be resourced as well. An acknowledgement that nature recovery needs cooperation across boundaries, so that's between farmers and landowners, but also between different LNRS areas is something that we've heard quite a bit. Public behaviour is really important and has an effect on farmland. So particularly things like how members of the public manage dogs around both livestock and ground nesting birds. So there was kind of a call for public education, and that tenure and timescales matter. So the way the document is structured, so there's a summary document for the strategy, which has our the kind of vision and mission. So the mission is that 30% of our land and water is in good condition for nature as soon as possible, but 2030 is the target set upon that. And then there's a series of priorities in terms of how we get there. And then as you delve deeper into the strategy, there's specific measures and metrics that are most relevant for farmers. And a lot of those are about how you encourage natural corridors across farmland, encouraging hedgerows and other things. I have a separate document that I'll share post webinar, which sets out the key measures for farmers. And when we get into discussion, I might be able to go and pull them up. So at the development stage, some of the kind of practical suggestions were kind of thinking about, a lot of it really was about how does this link to existing schemes, and how do you build in things that are really locally applicable. So right tree, right place. So thinking about wild fire risks, thinking about different and appropriate management tools across our different landscapes, including blanket bog and natural flood management, and thinking about how this aligns with the SFI, so the and the triple SI, so sites of special scientific interest, which all sort of designate farmers to work in certain ways. And again, a kind of a really strong plea about woodland management rather than just woodland creation, and that's come up in our recent conversations as well, which is, things over 30 years aren't necessarily a long enough timescale if you're taking productive land out of use for nature. So we've done 2 kind of farmer specific events before this. So we did a fish and chip tea up in Bradfield and Sannington, and we welcomed about 20 local farmers to that. And then we did a very specific kind of round table with a farming cluster called the Limestone Ridge, who were based more kind of Doncaster way. So this combines kind of the things we've heard from farmers in this latter phase, so the final consultation before publication, a really strong sense that farm clusters are the right delivery mechanism for the LNRS. So that's when you bring a group of 5 or more farmers and landowners together to work together on priorities. And there was a really strong theme through that actually, you need to start with relationships, trust, and those groups need formal facilitation. There was some really bold thinking about, well, could actually South Yorkshire lead the way? Could you have a super cluster where you could invest in and then connect kind of local farming clusters to really build kind of a movement of how farmers can support each other in industry, but also nature recovery. Again, this theme about nature recovery working for farms. So food production and nature recovery need to be designed together. We need to acknowledge that different landscapes need different solutions. So examples there was, the farming that happens in our uplands is very different to the large-scale agricultural farming we get once you get down to the plains. And each of those areas will have very specialist knowledge of their own land. And sort of a plea that, where you do have good practice and there is good practice in place, that it's acknowledged and recognised. You guys are sat on top of my slide. Excuse me, I'm going to go back, but I couldn't see it. So in terms of sort of long-term action, again, there was this sort of a plea that, short-term grants aren't enough to support long-term stewardship. A thing that really kind of hit home for me was also somebody saying, we're being given grants to put in ponds, but actually it would be better if the public system just bought from us. That was our cow Molly, who distributes milk, and they don't really sell into the local system. So you might have more impact as a system if you just invested in local production. That tenancy, like lots of farmers are on short-term tenancies now, and that can impact people's ability to engage. And the idea that, encouraging, I don't think we're allowed to use any language that's around setting off lots of fires. That's no longer appropriate, but, allowing 1,000 flowers to bloom and letting different projects start. Seed funding's often enough. So the shared recommendations coming out of what we've done so far is, seeing farmers, and they control 40% of the land across South Yorkshire. They need to be core delivery partners. The ask was, back farm clusters and those roles that facilitate them, and asked to use, flexible and evidence-led frameworks, like accepting that evidence will change. But you should work with the best evidence of the day. There was an ask for, investment beyond grants. So how do we really pull together those kind of more complicated finance packages to deliver like landscape scale change? And again, this idea of buying from local farmers rather than creating kind of grant programs, etc. So the things that we'll stop sharing and we'll stop talking and we'll do a bit of listening, but we wanted to kind of ask for views on this call. If you've had time to read the strategy, do you feel like it does reflect different farming and landscapes? Is there anything from your perspective that you'd like to add to the conversation around farm clusters? I know people on the call will be doing their own thing, so it'd be good to just hear a bit about who's in the room and their reflections on what we've shared. So I'm going to come off share now. Bear with me. Always slightly terrified I hit the leave webinar button when I do that, but I didn't do it, so that's good. Nick, we had time to sort of introduce slightly before we started. Abby, I don't know if you want to come in and say a bit about where you're from and the perspective you're bringing this evening.
Hi, oh gosh, hang on. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but
yeah, we can. Yeah.
So I'm afraid I'm joining just on my phone, sort of from a car park with sort of fairly bad reception. So that's. But to be fair, I really was just joining just from a point of view of interest, just to kind of understand sort of, a bit more about, the sort of what you've developed. So I still need to actually kind of look at the strategy myself. So I perhaps haven't got a huge amount to contribute, unfortunately, at this point, other than just to kind of gain a bit of awareness myself.
And what's your connection to land? Are you a land manager? Are you joining with a different interest?
Yeah, so I'm joining from sort of basically the Peak Park, but from a sort of land ownership, land management point of view. So sort of fairly new in the role, and so again that was another reason for just trying to gain a bit of understanding around what the strategy kind of looked like in the sense of this particular area.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, thanks for joining. Nick, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so I haven't read the strategy yet, but what you've presented there's a few things that really do resonate. I mean, that need for long-term schemes and funding is absolutely critical thing. I like the fact that you've got the idea of the farming clusters, and the two you've spoken about already. One is upland, one is lowland, very different, and that's interesting. There was a good point about short-term tenancies. Sheffield City Council own a lot of farmland and they have a lot of tenants. And I know of one in our area who does work with the Wildlife Trust. He's on a rolling 1-year tenancy. So stuff he'd love to do, but he can't do on the basis of 1 year, because how much time can he invest in it if he may not have that land in a year's time, because the council, through whatever financial situation, might have to sell it. So I think that short-term tenancy thing is certainly an issue. I suppose I've got I suppose I've got a couple of questions. You've obviously been talking to the farmers. Have the NFU actually had an input into this as well as a representative body?
So if I come in on that, Nick, yes, we have been in contact with the NFU sort of throughout the strategy development, and they've managed to come to a number of our workshops. So in particular, I'm thinking about workshops, but rewinding about past almost a year actually, in particular where we had we'd sort of developed an early draft of our so-called priorities and measures across the different habitat types. So and we were at the point of wanting to test that with wider audiences, and the NFU did come to that one. So kind of fed in terms of the actual content, the written content. So when you get a chance to read the strategy, and again, I'm using sort of DEFRA terminology, so excuse me, but they call them priorities, and then within priorities you've got measures. So really, it's priorities are kind of what do you need to do? What's the kind of intervention, if you like, and why? So, for example, it could be grip blocking, in moorland. Why? Obviously, to slow the flow of water, to rejuvenate peatland, and sequester carbon, and so on. So and then the measure is the specific action. So the NFU representative was part of those workshops, and then fast forward again to earlier this year, we got to the last stage, which I very briefly showed on the slide earlier, where we have these priorities and measures, and we're mapping we're mapping, where these interventions will best should be best placed. And again, I think we had NFU representation in the closest thing to an agricultural, the agricultural sector there, which I think was the grassland and heathland one. So yeah, they've been a bit. I don't know, Chris, if they might have been to the Limestone Ridge last week, or
the NFU weren't there, but they will be. We're at the. Some of our colleagues are at the Great Yorkshire Show, which was last week, I think, and they would have had a presence there, and they'll have been invited to take part. So we've sent them emails and made them aware that the final consultation is happening. I suppose from our perspective, the consultation really has kind of three purposes at this stage. So one is, all this work's gone into development, and really at this stage we're hoping that we're not going to get anything too new. It's going to be a case of, have we got it right? We've really listened to people and fed that in. And broadly, I think what I've heard through the public events, we haven't analysed all the surveys yet, is yes, this feels like a very sensible strategy. The second thing we're trying to do is just really raise awareness that it exists and it's a thing. As we've been out at a lot of public events, people aren't necessarily aware that there is such a thing as a local nature recovery strategy. But the critical bit for us now is, also how do we deliver it? So how do we make sure that the strategy really comes to life for all of us who are really passionate about trying to deliver that mission? And I think it's interesting that the work that you both do at Ugg Hill, which is kind of a nature demonstrator farm, but the work that the Wildlife Trust have done with the Sheffield Lakeland Partnership really looked at how can you engage farmers. But I think by nature of who steps forward when you do a consultation, we've probably spoken to the farmers who care most about nature, but we've had some really, really interesting, I think, feedback, and the clusters seem really committed to doing stuff if they're enabled to.
Yeah.
I've got one more question. I've got one more thing. So when you first showed the different types of landscape, and we, of course, on the very western side, we've got a lot of moorland. Have you been able to get any engagement from the likes of the Moscar, Fitzwilliam and Bromhead estates? Because historically they've proven to be a bit reluctant to engage with anybody, really. So given that, you talk quite rightly about re-wetting the uplands and for flood management and biodiversity, I believe myself personally that that's an issue, and I just wondered whether we'd managed to engage with them at all.
So we've had Fitzwilliam Wentworth estate, if that's what you meant by when you said Fitzwilliam. Yeah, they did attend again. It's going back almost a year to the August series of workshops we had on the content of the priorities measures. So yeah, we did reach out to them, and they did come to that. The other names you mentioned off the top of my head, I can't remember, I'm afraid. The Moscar estate.
We're anticipating that they will have been engaged with again at the Great Yorkshire Show, because often those bigger landowners are there. So we know that the forestry, I've forgotten the name. Who's the forestry team that we work with, Laurie?
The forestry organisation.
Yeah.
Forestry Commission.
It is the Forestry Commission. I keep having a moment.
There's Forestry England as well, isn't there?
They always have an area at the Great Yorkshire Show, and they're regularly visited by those landowners. So we knew that they would engage there. We have reached out directly to some of those large landowners. I think some of that comes into as well the conversation around tenancies. Because there's the tenancies that sit under Sheffield City Council, which have been mentioned, but the farmers up in Stannington and Bradwell also talked about, when farmland, like large swathes of land are bought up as kind of investments, and then you have those short-term lease. So, you speak to somebody who's had a lifetime is currently under a lifetime lease and knows all the farms around them are going for, 5-10 year leases that have break clauses within them, which just isn't long enough to really drive a recovery agenda very easily.
Yes, we've noticed little pockets of land are getting bought by investment companies, and some of it is it's not farmland that could ever be productive. So it's obviously a tax dodge with it, we believe, certainly in the local area, the ones that have been buying it. Just seems fairly random.
Yeah. I mean, there is one of the things that has been mentioned, and I think is definitely, Laurie might talk more about it, when you look at there's the money that will come from DEFRA, but a lot of that's really about how you hold the strategy, isn't it, Laurie, and how you deliver it. But pooling together some of those bigger budgets, which will come from biodiversity net gain, the infrastructure levy, with kind of green investments. There's lots more interest in green investments. One of the things that Laurie's colleague Zoe was talking about, she's joined the Marathon Blind Authority because she has a track record of building kind of finance, sustainable finance pots, basically, and using those kind of creating that, because it's not going to come from one source of funding. It's going to have to be kind of brought together through various strands. Was an interesting discussion we had.
Yeah, just to build on that, I mean, I talked about environmental land management schemes, so the sort of future, post common agricultural policy, farming incentive scheme, and within that, landscape recovery as a sort of capital L, capital R, so as a scheme, and the direction of travel from government being generally towards strategic, long-term, contiguous areas of land sort of joined up with a long-term nature recovery proposition, and funding that through, as I said, on a long-term basis, but funding it partly through the public purse, but then also partly through finance as well. So that seems to be the direction of travel of government in this space, and I think we're on to round 3 of landscape recovery already. As an organisation, that would seem to be the kind of area that we could add value, and certainly would carry weight. Something sort of using the local nature recovery strategy as a reference, as a kind of as a way of putting together a potential scheme would seem like a really really fertile ground to work in. So that's kind of probably looks like a work stream that we will begin. I think the difficulty is kind of how you reconcile that with some of the messages that are coming, that Chris just talked about in terms of the short-term tenancies. So it's how do you navigate that and find a way around that. I think there's probably no easy answers. We are, as an organization, others have published before. Other local nature recovery strategies are ahead of us, so that there is interesting work that we can look at elsewhere, for how we can do this. But I think it's probably a really difficult question to answer. But and of course not all of the detail on how nature recovery strategies will be implemented is available yet. And I think you mentioned this as well, Chris, that we have initial funding for capacity for being in this space. What we don't have is kind of large devolved pots of funding to go and deliver the nature recovery strategy. I mean, that may come, but certainly we're not in that space yet. So it's kind of navigating the environment that we are currently in.
Do you want to come in?
Right.
Sorry, I know you talk about the nephew. I have cousins in North Wales who are upland sheep farmers who tend to say, well, they just represent the large farming community. But there's also Nature Friendly Farming Network, and I follow the Land Workers Alliance as well. So I don't know if they've been engaged or they've come to talk to you, because I'd have thought they would, because they're into nature friendly farming as well on a smaller scale, and they've got lots of different ideas. Keith, I don't know if you know Keith Tompkins, you might know, yeah, okay, and Wendy, you will know Keith.
Everybody knows Keith.
And Wendy, I spend most of my time volunteering with her up at Oak Hill, so I talk a lot about her. They were talking about cluster farming at the weekend as well, which sounds good, and I think that's something that's come out of the DEFRA announced a farming document, I think it was sometime last week, that I read the Land Workers Alliance response to, so that looked quite good from a small farming point of view. And another thing from council-owned farms, these are mainly comments, not particularly questions, but from council-owned farms, I don't know if you've heard of Guy Shrubsole. I read his Who Owns England book a few years ago, which I found quite depressing, but it gives you lots of information. But a lot of farmers were sold. Now there's a farm that we're particularly interested in, talking about contiguous areas and land, one near the Wildlife Trust, and it's not out of the question that that when the current tenants retire, their kids don't want to take it on. So what would happen then? It's council owned. It's very, very, very useful. It's got fantastic wildflower meadows. The way they've found it in a nature friendly way for as long as they've had it. Keith would love to get his hands on it. So what happens then? And having a relationship with the council, I mean, and how to manage those farms in the future, because it's. I mean, I knew that farm long before I'd heard of Oak, because our kids are in their 30s now, but we used to take them when they were toddlers and babies and go walking in them, and have picnics. So it's important to us too from that point of view. So talking about people's relationship with the land and what it can offer. So that's really important. And I have done that survey thing. I did it right in the early days. Just things like that. I was going to go off on something in a minute. Just the relationship between the Wildlife Trust and no doubt others with the council, because there's Harrison's Plantation, which I heard about, and the Wildlife Trust, we're in agreement almost with the council to manage that, and we'd love to go up there. And I did what was that bird? I can't remember now. A wood something or other. Sorry, I'm not used to speaking in public. No, it wasn't a woodcock. No. It'll come back to me. It'll come back to me. It's not something that we're expecting in this area. The BTO wanted us to do just to go up and see if we could hear it and see it up there last year, which I wasn't able to because it wasn't there. But just managing those sort of areas as well, and that seems to have fallen through. Why has that sort of thing fallen through? Because that looked, it's got heather, it's got bilberry. I know there are interesting bees up there, and there's certainly the green hair streak butterfly up there, and cuckoos. There were 3 male cuckoos calling last year. That's really a good plot of land for the Wildlife Trust to be working on. So I don't know why we're not taking that sort of thing on. I don't know what resources the council have, but we all know that everywhere's strapped. No. I know, but that's something that we could do more with, and that's part of a contiguous area as well, perhaps as well.
It was interesting. There was some interesting ideas from the Sannington group as well, which we're talking about. There's a group of young farmers that meet in the Hope Valley, and there's kind of a group of 80 of them, and not all of them have access to land. So some of the ideas there, how do you connect the people who want to get into farming, and how do you connect through the agricultural colleges, and think about pathways for people to with nature, but also get experience in like regenerative or nature friendly farming. So that was certainly one of the suggestions. It would be really interesting to take that. I mean, in this phase, we're listening, and then we will take back to the steering group, which includes the council. And we've had really specific, feedback about certain fields and certain other bits of land that people think could be managed differently. That's what the maps are there for as well. So we can certainly reference that in what we share back to the steering group. Is there anything else you can share, Laurie, about the kind of plans for that steering group and how it will work to support delivery?
So I think the governance model as it currently exists is it has been set up for the purpose of developing the strategy. So I think it will kind of naturally expire once the strategy is published and the process is finished. But I think certainly given the work that we're going to be kicking off once the strategy is out, in terms of leading that, continuing the governance and sort of convening partners to deliver on this, I think we'll go through a process of looking at sort of reviewing, I would say, what that governance model needs to be. And one thing we've heard quite strongly is, farmer representation absolutely should be on there. And certainly within the advisory panel, we did have farmer representation. So that's a piece of work for us to look at. What does that governance model look like? And probably using existing structures, so like the South Yorkshire Local Nature Partnership. But yeah, that's a kind of a key piece of work for us. Is what does that look like? How does that feed into to different authorities, to different kind of key stakeholders? So that's all. Yeah, that's all work to do. I kind of wish someone on one of my colleagues at the Sheffield City Council was on the call to give more insight into what you were talking about there in terms of the connection between the Wildlife Trust and certain sites.
It sounds like there's a wonderful opportunity there. We've got young farmers who want to get into farming, and yet the council have tenants who may be retiring soon and no one to support them, but the council will want to reap the monies for selling them off. So it'd be great to be able to support the council to be able to keep that land and give those opportunities to young farmers. That would be a fantastic win-win-win in a way. And
I don't know what the latest DEFRA document said but I think the Land Brokers Alliance did say actually it's really, really encouraging that they want to get young people into farming as well. Woodlark, that was the bird, woodlark. Sorry.
It always comes back eventually. You just have to put it away somewhere. Well, that's really helpful. I don't know, Abby, if you have any other thoughts and questions, anything you'd like to kind of add, you might not be able to join still, but just pausing and giving you a chance.
Sorry, I've just
I think your phone reception has gone a bit. It has gone a bit bad. I could hear you before.
Yeah.
Oh, but yeah. Well, thank you for joining. If there's no other kind of burning reflections or questions, we'll start to draw the session to a close. I suppose my ask is we are closing on Friday. We need about another 20 surveys to get over 2,000, which would make me very, very happy if we could get beyond that number. But we have spoken to probably over 1,000 people on top of that, which I think makes us one of the most consulted final strategies that we've seen since as we've looked at other areas. But if you think there's anybody who hasn't completed a survey, please encourage them to. We've got until Friday to get as many views, whether that's just people saying we really support nature recovery, or people who have really specific things they want to tell us about putting it into practice. We will I will share the recording of this session and the slides afterwards. And yeah, thank you very much for joining, and sign up for updates as we move into delivery. Cool. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, see you later.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.